What is going on, everyone? Welcome into our next deep dive. We are getting closer and closer to finishing up the series, revealing my number one team in my power rankings. Today, we have the number 8 ranked Miami Dolphins, a team with a lot of expectations heading into next year. It's going to be a fun one to break this team down. But before we do get started, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below, it really does help me out. Tells YouTube you enjoy the video and to push it out to other NFL fans just like you. Also consider subscribing if you enjoy. We're going to be dropping these about every other day now as we gear up for the start of the regular season. But without further ado, let's get into it as always, starting by recapping this team's offseason. And thank you to everybody from last episode for giving me your feedback. We are going to go back to the previous format for this segment where we're going to talk about the upgrades and downgrades at each position group. So for the Dolphins, starting with the coaching staff, they do make a big decision to move on from Coach Boyer with the defensive coordinator. I don't think he was bad necessarily, but definitely the blitz-happy approach got them burned a few too many times. And he wasn't quite what Brian Flores was running that system. So they're going to bring in the legend Vic Fangio. I do see this as an upgrade, though there are some very interesting schematic kind of scheme fit types of conversations with some of the existing talent on this roster, how they're going to fit in more of a zone heavy system. We will get into all of that throughout the video, but overall an upgrade to the coaching staff. At quarterback, I'm going to leave this as neutral. They do have a nice signing of Mike White as a backup quarterback. They let Teddy Bridgewater go. You know, not enough for me to say that the quarterback room was upgraded, leaving that as neutral. Then at running back, slightly upgraded. I like the addition of Devon Achane, the speedy running back in the 3rd round, but not sure how much he's going to play this year. And then at tight end, I have this as slightly downgraded. On paper, this looks more significantly downgraded because Mike Gesicki is a decent name, and I think he's going to be decent for New England, but for what he brought to this team within Mike McDaniel's scheme, it was very little. You know, they're going to miss him in the red zone. They won't be able to do as much with their tight end in the receiving game, but they didn't do a ton of that anyway. So I don't think they're going to miss Mike Gesicki that much. They didn't even really have to think about letting him go, but it is a slight downgrade at the position group, right? Really, all they do is bring in a couple of journeyman blocking types, Eric Saubert, Tyler Kroft. They draft an interesting hybrid receiver tight end that's going to be in development in Elijah Higgins in the 6th round. And by the way, they also lose Hunter Long in that trade for Jalen Ramsey, who is a decent prospect. 3rd round pick out of Boston College, no longer here. Then you go to wide receiver. I have this as slightly upgraded. They're going to say goodbye to Trent Sherfield, who played okay as their wide receiver 3 last year. But they're going to bring in Braxton Berrios, who's finally kind of freed a little bit from trying to scrap for targets and playing time with the Jets. And then they also bring in Robbie Chosen Anderson for some backup speed in case something happens to Waddle or Hill. So nothing major there, but I do think that's slightly upgraded. Likewise with the offensive line, I have that listed as slightly upgraded this offseason as well. They are going to let Brandon Shell leave. He started about 2/3 of their games at tackle and was okay. They're not going to miss him too much. They bring in a bunch of depth pieces. The most notable is going to be Isaiah Wynn, who I thought would be starting for this team, but he was really bad for New England last year after a good start to his career. So maybe not quite as big of an addition as it looked on the kind of first Shefty bomb, if you will. But also addition by subtraction, Greg Little no longer here, who had to play 50% of their snaps last year. He was brutal. That's addition by subtraction. And then more depth, Cedric Ogbuehi, Dan Feeney, some journeyman veterans, along with 7th-round rookie Ryan Hayes out of Michigan. So more bodies, but no one terribly notable. No one that's even guaranteed to be an upgrade over Brandon Shell, but the collection of talent as a whole, I think, makes it a slight upgrade to the offensive line. So offensively, overall, mostly neutral. You know, they were really good offensively last year. They make some slight tweaks and adjustments, but they didn't need to do a whole lot to this offense. Defensively, they were a little bit more busy. Not so much with the defensive line, interior defensive line I have just ever so slightly upgraded because they are getting an expensive interior piece back in Emmanuel Ogbah. They're letting veteran nose tackle John Jenkins go. Not a ton to say there. Ogbah wasn't great last year after getting a huge contract last year, but you'd rather have him back than not. On the edge, this one might trigger some Dolphins fans, but I've actually got this as neutral. I'll just get this take out of the way now. I think the move of trading a first-round pick for Bradley Chubb and then paying him the contract they gave him was one of the worst moves a front office has made in about 5 years, really since the Chiefs did a very similar thing to go get Frank Clark. Chubb's a fine player, as we'll see later, but I don't even have this as an upgrade going from having Melvin Ingram and a half season of Bradley Chubb to then having a full season of Bradley Chubb. I'm just going to call it neutral to be nice, but let's face it, Melvin Ingram, even though he's older, is a better player than Bradley Chubb, and they paid way more to keep him here. So I am going to leave this as neutral. It's not the end of the world, but I don't think that was the move that I think a lot of Dolphins fans hoped it would be. I would love to be proven wrong about that. They also bring in Malik Reed, who is reunited with Vic Fangio here. But then at linebacker, I do have that group as upgraded. They say goodbye to their number 2 linebacker, Elandon Roberts, and are going to go with David Long, the free agent signing from Tennessee. Good player. That's going to be an upgrade. And then the cornerback room is really where they spent the most of their offseason capital, which wasn't a ton because they didn't have that first-round pick because they gave it up for Bradley Chubb. But they really aren't losing anybody in the cornerback room other than Jalen Ramsey for 2/3 of the season, who is also listed as an addition. They go and trade for him. Jalen Ramsey's a superstar, but is going to miss, it sounds like, the majority of the regular season. Then they spent a second-round pick on Cam Smith. And then they sign Eli Apple after the Jalen Ramsey injury to get some depth there. So the cornerback room that did struggle last year should be much better, especially later in the year. And then at safety, they say goodbye to Eric Rowe, who's been here in that Patriot-style defense here for a few years, and they bring in Deshaun Elliott. Also not listed there, but they get their other safety, Brandon Jones, back healthy, who missed about half the season. I'm going to leave that as slightly upgraded, nothing overly noteworthy. And then kicker, punter, they are making a change at punter, where Thomas Morstead is going to leave and Jake Bailey's going to come in. Morstead's probably a little bit better than Bailey, but, I'm not going to put downgrade on that. It's pretty close. But as you can see, the defense definitely where you're going to look at this team on paper and say they got much better on that side of the ball, especially when you factor in the addition of Vic Fangio, which takes us to the coach and scheme segment of the video. Let's start with head coach Mike McDaniel. I've got McDaniel ranked as the 10th best head coach in the NFL heading into year 2, and it was really impressive to see him really just step in and hit the ground running. Really from week 1, it was jaw-dropping how well he kind of looked at this team with Tua and these receivers and looked at his past with the Kyle Shanahan-style offenses that he's been a part of and really just brought his own unique version of that Shanahan offense to the table. Of course, it had the groundwork of wide zone running and play action, but it was so much more than that. Felt like there was a lot of plays in his back pocket that he didn't get to break out under Kyle Shanahan. By the way, if you have not listened to the Athletics podcast called Play Callers, Mike McDaniel's a big focus in that, along with Shanahan and all these Shanahan-style coaches. If you want to learn more about who Mike McDaniel is, what types of plays and schemes and leadership he has, that's the place to go. I'd almost just defer you to that, but like I was saying, it felt like he had some stuff in his back pocket that he couldn't wait to kind of be freed and let loose, whether that's the classic Tyreek Hill jet motion wheel route that was so uncoverable for the first half of the season, but also the implementation of RPOs with Tua, knowing how good Tua is as an RPO threat. So was just really impressed with his ability right out the gate to show that straight up, he is an offensive guru and one of the best in the league. I've got the Dolphins ranked in tier 1 for pass game coaching. I was that impressed by what Mike McDaniel did here last year. And tier 2 in run game coaching, where I still liked a lot of what their run game did. They rank from 2nd in the league to 6th in terms of their run game coaching, but it's not quite as elite as the pass game coaching, where they truly wowed me. They aren't going to rank quite as high for that overall coach and culture grade that I give every team, which is sort of the benefit of the doubt slider. I think they've earned some benefit of the doubt. It's not a bad ranking there in my 3rd tier for that category. But Mike McDaniel's still a young coach and trying to still kind of prove what he brings to the table from a leadership and culture perspective. I think that's fair. You also got to mention offensive coordinator Frank Smith, who I think deserves at least some credit for the success this team had in the passing game last year. Frank Smith's resume is really impressive. He's worked with some of the more notable play callers of the last decade, Sean Payton and John Gruden. And I love that Mike McDaniel looked at a guy that's a little more pro style, modern pro style, with more of a typical, pro spread drop back game, if you will, which isn't necessarily what comes to mind in a Shanahan style offense. And I love that Mike McDaniel brought in a guy with that mindset to kind of be a meeting of the minds and really formulate a well-crafted passing game here. But obviously, when you look at what this team accomplished through the air last year, and you look at his resume, Frank Smith is an ascending coach, and if they have another great year offensively, I would not be surprised to see him enter the head coach interviews conversation. So a pretty glowing review of the offensive coaching staff, which is not going to come as a surprise to anybody. But you look at the defense, and it's similar. I mean, getting Vic Fangio in here was literally highway robbery. Everyone assumed he would just step in as the Eagles defensive coordinator, and Eagles fans were super excited for the thought of that because he's probably a better defensive mind than Jonathan Gannon, who went and got a head coaching job somewhere else. But the Dolphins were able to pluck him out of Philadelphia, and this really is the godfather of modern schemes around the league. Like, I'm not going to say he's quite Kyle Shanahan levels of genius, but he's not that far behind. But he's very similar in that half the league is trying to replicate his scheme because of the success he had about 5 years ago in Chicago, carrying that success over to Denver's defense after that as a head coach. And Fangio really is the guy that kind of cracked the code, so to speak, with all of these super weapons at quarterback coming into the league, whether that was Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, with this philosophy with his defense where the idea is, at the core, is you're going to have two hybrid safeties pre-snap showing too high that can then rotate into any variation of coverage. Cover 3, cover 4, quarter, half, which is cover 2 on one side, cover 6 on the other. Cover 2, you can run that as well. Quarters, if I didn't mention that already. You can even get into man coverage from those looks. But the idea here is, A, we're going to play off coverage, 2 safeties over the top more often than not, and prevent explosive plays. Don't let these super weapons at quarterback to get these massive chunks through the air. Force them to throw underneath where, A, all of our defensive backs are playing zone coverage with their eyes on the quarterback. So if the quarterback makes a mistake, you're in a position to capitalize and convert an interception. But also, B, using the threat of those rotating safeties, not in the sense of, depth chart and like getting guys on and off the field, but literally rotating up and down on the field, using that threat to hopefully confuse the quarterback and force 1 or 2 mistakes on a drive that you're hoping is going to have to be a 13-play drive if they're going to score, because you're not giving up big plays. And initially this worked great. Like Chicago's defense, Denver's defense, everybody saw this and they're like, wow, we figured out how to stop Mahomes. We figured out how to stop Josh Allen. Now, the problem is there's serious trade-offs to this concept where you can pick them apart underneath. Soft, squishy zones, you're getting free releases from your wide receivers. So slants, out routes, stop routes on the outside, And then, of course, the evolution of the run game in the NFL. This man right here, Vic Fangio, is the reason last year was by far the biggest yards per attempt in NFL history. Because if you're going to run this system, you're coming out in a base 4-2 nickel pretty much, unless you have to come out in a heavy package to stop the run. And, you know, the league has really adapted. And it will be interesting to see Fangio after a couple of years kind of coming back in as a defensive coordinator. But the difference between Fangio and all of his disciples that are busy getting fired right now, like Ed Donatel and Joe Woods wasn't a disciple, but really tried to replicate that scheme in Cleveland. Joe Barry's going to get fired in Green Bay after another disappointing season this upcoming season. The difference with Vic Fangio is even in his last year in Denver, he was able to see this stuff happening and say, okay, well, screw it. I'm just going to run a lot of cover one. And the Broncos in their final year with Fangio were, I think, like third or maybe even first in the league in the amount of true cover one. And Fangio isn't just going to run quarters all the time. Like, yeah, he opened up that scheme as an option and a way to defend these other quarterbacks, but he can play left-handed. He can bring out whatever he wants because he's Vic Fangio. He's one of the smartest defensive minds in the league. So I am excited to see kind of what he's looked at, kind of how the league has transformed since he's been away and what approach he wants to make. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't at least a step skeptical that they're going to get into too much of the Fangio, Kool-Aid, if you will, and this team's going to go from being really aggressive to now too conservative. But I do have faith in Vic Fangio to find that right balance. So I've got him ranked in tier 2 of defensive coaching, which ranges anywhere from 3rd to 13th in the NFL. Overall, this is an excellent coaching staff, and they will be a big reason for any success they have this season, and probably won't be the reason if their season doesn't go according to plan. But before we get into the roster portion of the video, I got to tell you guys about today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. We've got one more week of preseason here, and then we are into the regular season, which means there's no better time to sign up at Underdog and get ready for your weekly Pick'em contests. Pick'em is easily my favorite way to play fantasy football. You string together lineups, and they will set higher or lower on player stats. So that's going to be Tua passing yards, Raheem Mostert rushing yards. They also have season-long pick'ems right now, which are a ton of fun to string these things together. And if you hit on all of your selections, you can get up to 20-to-1 payouts. So you can put in a small number on your entry, $2 to win 40, something like that. And even if you lose, it gets you so much more invested in any given slate of games because you're down to the fourth quarter. Even if the game's a blowout, you're waiting to see if that running back can get another 5 rushing yards so that your slip can hit. Pick'ems are the best, man. You've probably seen these screenshots going around on X.com of people sharing their lineups, and I know you guys are going to love it. And if you sign up right now at Underdog Fantasy, not only will you support my channel in a big way, but they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That is easily a extra season's worth of pick'em slips. So that's promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, and let's get back into it. And now let's get into the roster portion of the video where we are going to rank each position groups and how they stack up against the rest of the league. And that's going to start with the quarterback conversation, which is an extremely difficult one for the Miami Dolphins. Number one, because off the field, we don't know for sure that Tua can make it through a season healthy. In fact, he's shown that that is a challenge for him. And the fear is one more concussion could take him out of the sport for good. And we are all obviously praying that that does not happen, but that fear has to creep into the back of your mind. And for that reason, you see that they rank 21st here. That's not the true quarterback grade of Tua. Tua would come in more 17th or 18th if you could guarantee me a full season. But it's not just the off the field with Tua that you can criticize. You know, everybody finds it pretty easy to point out the turnover-worthy plays, which are very high for Tua, Feels like once or twice a week he's trying to throw the ball directly to a linebacker. Also just doesn't have the strongest arm. Again, once or twice a week you see a throw from Tua where you're like, woof, that was a bit of a noodle. But it's also easy to forget or dismiss a lot of the really special stuff that Tua does as a quarterback. And he definitely impressed me last year to the point where I know when he's playing, he's at least a good starting quarterback in the NFL. And the biggest thing I really want to talk about is his ability to throw with anticipation. And this really stood out to me. Something kind of clicked as I was rewatching some film for this. He has a shocking a resemblance in terms of his passing style to Phillip Rivers, with how consistently he throws the ball before the receivers actually open, where he's throwing it into a hole in his zone. He's throwing it before the receiver wins against man coverage. He has really good anticipation to know what the coverage is and where to get the ball so his receiver can go make that play. And it's really a unique trait that very few, if any, quarterbacks in the league really have. And I want to give him credit for that. But that play style is what leads to a lot of those turnover-worthy plays. So it's a little bit of a give and take. And I say that because he's not always right. You know, maybe 5% of the time he's going to misread the coverage, or the receiver won't get there in time, and he's throwing it right to a defender. And that's why he has so many of these throws where you're like, Tua, what were you thinking on that? It's like he thought he had something else and it just didn't play out that way. And it can lead to some really ugly plays and some very costly mistakes. Like you look at that Packers game, and that cost them that game, for example. There's other times where those critical mistakes come at bad times, and you're sitting there just throwing your hands up like, well, Tua's going to Tua, I guess. But the trade-off there is it can lead to a really explosive offense where he's hitting these receivers, the fastest group in the league by far, in stride, on time. And it's not just in the short to intermediate game. It's throwing go balls down the sideline where he throws a really nice touch pass. It's these deep benders and posts where he has just enough arm strength to get it out there with accuracy, usually, to make those big plays. So he reads all three levels of the defense. He uses the full field. It's just how consistently can he do that? It's not at a great or elite level, or not even close. And do I think Dolphins fans overrate Tua? Yeah, a little bit, for sure. But he's still a good quarterback, and when healthy, with this play calling and these receivers, they showed last year this was one of the best offenses in the NFL, and certainly a quarterback that, with this surrounding cast, can be good enough to win a Super Bowl with. And I would not have said that about Tua before what we saw last season. Now, there is one other thing I want to give Tua credit for, and that is he did unlock, I think, one really elite trait last year, and that was his efficiency in the red zone, where he navigates pressure really well. He isn't like, he's not Derek Carr or Matt Ryan, where if he doesn't like what he sees right away, he's just gonna, either throw it out of bounds or force a fade to the outside. He's patient in the red zone, and that's really important to kind of buy time and wait for those small windows to open up, because that's the hardest part of the field to score in, and he was really good down there. So he impressed me in that regard. He's got enough mobility to do that, to kind of extend plays, and sometimes it's in the pocket, sometimes it's out of the pocket. So I want to give him credit for that as well. Ultimately, if Tua can stay healthy, they're going to end up with about the 16th best quarterback in the NFL. And with these weapons, like I said, they can certainly take that next step and even win a Super Bowl. But as we've seen throughout his career, it's a pretty big if, and we all know about that. In terms of the backup room, you do got to talk about Mike White a little bit because of those injury concerns. Mike White's fine. As he's shown with the Jets, he can step in and have some good starts, but the problem is he's got some really ugly starts as well. He's just a wildly inconsistent quarterback. You watch some of his starts and you're like, wow, that's a starting quarterback in the NFL. You watch him play against the Seahawks and you're like, get this clown off the field. So it's a fine enough signing as a backup, but I don't think they'd get the weekly consistency to really be a threat in the AFC with Mike White. But maybe if Tua goes down for a week or two, you can get a good start out of Mike White and buy you a win. Skyler as well played last year. He was adequate as a QB3. I'll just leave it at that. But obviously, Tua's health is the biggest variable for this team's season as a whole. But a big part of Tua's breakout last year and why you feel like he can play at a high enough level to win a Super Bowl is these weapons here, where I rank the Dolphins third in offensive weaponry. And obviously that is centered around Tyreek Hill. And I will apologize to Vikings fans. I know I said in the Vikings deep dive that Justin Jefferson is the best wide receiver. And I still think in terms of full, complete skill set, in terms of route running, catch radius, like the whole package, yeah, Justin Jefferson would probably grade out at each individual box, would check out a little bit better. But I do think Tyreek Hill is the best weapon in the NFL, if you will. And I would have considered him that way before the year last year, but he took two massive steps in his game last year that I'm ready to say Tyreek Hill is, in a way, the best wide receiver in the NFL. Number one is the hands. He had always been a guy that dropped 9 or 10 passes a year. Well, last year, he got that drop rate down to just 3%. Just 4 drops on 167 targets last year. So cleaning that up just ups his consistency even more. But even like the hands showing up in the confidence to win contested catches wasn't quite a career year there, because 2018, he was insane with contested catches. But last year was the best year in 4 seasons in terms of his ability to body up defensive backs, go get the ball and win really difficult catches. 52% contested catch rate. Also disrupted 6 potential interceptions last season. That was tied for third in the NFL. So the ball skills really just taking a next step, which makes me feel more comfortable about leaving Tyreek Hill with the crown there in the wide receiver department. But the other area was his evolution more mentally with Tua, where his ability to find space in zones and work back to the football. There's just these really pretty plays once or twice a week where he kind of knows where Tua wants to put the ball, and then he uses that speed and acceleration to get to those spots, whether it's on a comeback or sitting down on a stick route in between zones. And just after, an off season away from football, revisiting Dolphins games, getting ready for this series, it was a very quick reminder of just how good Tyreek Hill is and how much he changes a game. His speed it's like a tier above anybody else in the league. And what's crazy is the next guy down in terms of speed at wide receiver in the NFL might be the wide receiver 2 here, Jalen Waddle. And Waddle's almost kind of like a young Tyreek Hill in terms of like the real knocks on him are, can he beat press coverage? Can he clean up his drops? Can he become a better contested catch target? That's really the only thing, quote unquote, holding Jalen Waddle back from being a true like top 10 superstar wide receiver. But his speed and his route running, and even some of the catches he can make down the field, where he will flash some brilliant, spectacular catches, they're all game-changing as well. And for him to be your wide receiver 2 here is a cheat code that this offense and Mike McDaniel and Tua have tapped into at a brilliant degree. I don't really have a bad word to say about Jalen Waddle. My respect for him is obviously shown in that ranking of them as the 3rd best group of weapons in the NFL. It's just, like I said, can he clean up some of the knocks in his game? And if he does, he can genuinely get up there to being something like a Tyreek Hill level of a weapon. But after those 2, it's not great. And on one hand, it kind of works in their favor because so much of the offense flows through these 2. And I think at times, like, too many weapons can be a bad thing. Like, I made that point when we were talking about, like, should the Eagles draft Jackson Smith and Jigba? And I'm like, I mean, maybe, but then you're taking away targets from A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith at a certain point. And when you have 2 guys like this, you don't really want to take too many targets away from them. And on one hand, it kind of helps them out, but if anything were to happen to one of these guys, I think you can start to raise some pretty significant questions about who would step up and how would this offense look. Because you can double Tyreek and you still can go to Jalen Waddle. But if you double Tyreek and Jalen Waddle's not there, you're going to feel pretty comfortable leaving the rest of these guys one-on-one. So it's something to keep an eye on. Like, they got to stay healthy, and then what happens if someone gets hurt? What does this offense look like? But that's not to say that the rest of the pieces here are, like, useless. And I think as complementary pieces, when those two top receivers are healthy, are pretty nice pieces here. So I like the Braxton Berrios signing as a slot option. Jets fans were upset with me last year when I said that Berrios was good enough to take a lot of snaps away from Elijah Moore, when Jets fans thought Moore was going to have a breakout season, and Berrios was good enough to basically keep Elijah Moore off the field and ultimately made Moore want to demand a trade. It's not to say Berrios was incredible or anything like that, but he's a solid slot option, and he's a lot faster than you would think. When he gets the ball in his hand on a crossing route, he pulls away from dudes. So obviously Mike McDaniel had seen that interdivision there and was like, yay, more small, slot builds with crazy speed. Now, he's not the vertical presence at all that Tyreek and Waddle are, but in terms of slants, crossing routes, whip routes, working the short to intermediate game, he makes sense here. And I think he could have some decent weeks as well. Then they've got kind of a different build for all their different backups, which is a good way to go about this. You got Cedric Wilson, who's kind of a balanced possession wide receiver, another guy that's really good after the catch, kind of just stashed sitting here. They gave him a decent contract after a good year in Dallas. I think he can play, but they clearly aren't that high on him. He just didn't play much last year, even though he was healthy. So it's kind of weird, but he's good depth, if nothing else. Then they signed Robbie Anderson. To me, this is clearly just trying to make sure you have a vertical threat that can do a little bit of what Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle can do if one of those guys goes down. So I like the process there, but Robbie Anderson hasn't been a good receiver for 2+ years. Now, before that, he was a really good vertical threat, one of the better ones in the league, but I don't think he's that guy anymore. I think he still has plenty of speed, but it's the physicality elements of the position that he really struggles with, the hands. I would worry about him working with the timing of Tua within this offense. I don't know. He's there. Don't mind it as a backup, decent enough dart to throw, but I wouldn't expect much there. They also have River Craycraft, who played very valiantly last year, but I think they just got a more explosive version of this player in Braxton Berrios as that slot guy. Then they got some younger guys they brought in last year, Eric Ezukanma, more of that possession receiver mold, and then Braylon Sanders. Testing my memory banks here, but I recall liking some of his playmaking ability and athleticism and how it could fit within this offense. So we'll see between Craycraft, Ezukanma, Braylon Sanders, even Kiki Kuti, who's another speedy, shifty slot type. We'll see who makes that wide receiver 6 spot. Won't be an easy job to win, and Craycraft's not going to give that up easy. Now, the tight end room is possibly the worst tight end room in the league, but they are also the least utilized tight end room in the league. They really designed this passing game through these two receivers, and it's not so much in a way that like a lot of these Shanahan-style offenses, the tight end some weeks can be a little bit more of the focal point of the passing game through play action. It's not really the case in Miami. They just throw to their receivers. The entire tight end room last year only had 47 catches for under 500 yards. So, it's just kind of a by choice thing here for Mike McDaniel. Durham Smythe has shown some flashes when they give him opportunities. It's pretty crazy for a 6'6", 6'7" tight end. They only threw him one contested catch opportunity last year. I'd be curious, as more of the full-time tight end, do they treat him as more of a red zone threat, give him an opportunity to show what he can do with his size a little bit more? Super stiff player, but maybe there's something there. It just hasn't really shown it yet. Decent blocker, whatever. Then you got some, journeyman veteran types, Eric Saubert, Tyler Croft, not even really worth our time. They'll just be doing their job as a blocker, and they're both okay in that department. Elijah Hickens is the guy that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. I'm less optimistic about it because they had that guy in Mike Gesicki and didn't really do anything with it. But Higgins is a wide receiver turned tight end, 6'3", 235 pounds coming out of Stanford. I really thought he lacked the instincts at the position, and that just led to some crazy inconsistency. Is a really nice athlete. He's Chase Claypool-esque in terms of his athletic profile, but isn't even the receiver that Claypool was, and Claypool had some of those problems himself. But they want to make him a tight end. We'll see if they have a plan. You know, he is faster than Mike Gesicki, and we know that nobody in the league is better at turning speed into production like Mike McDaniel. So we'll see. They also have Alec Ingold, is one of the more utilized fullbacks in the league within this system. Played a whopping 418 snaps last year, did see 22 targets. Wasn't particularly effective with those targets, but he will get the ball a little bit. In terms of the running backs, it's a pretty good group in terms of receiving game. You know, Raheem Mostert is just a very solid receiving threat, has never had like a massive season in the receiving game. Part of that is his health questions, but yeah, I mean, his speed translates in the screen game. He's tough after the catch. He's got solid hands, decent enough route runner, so they got a good option there. The next guy after that I would keep my eye on would be Devon Achane, who showed his flashes at Texas A&M. I think he can run routes and can be a threat. He's got insane athletic ability to potentially be a sort of almost Darren Sproles-esque weapon out of the backfield. So I would keep an eye on him once he gets healthy and maybe can start working third downs a little bit. Jeff Wilson and Savon Ahmed haven't shown a ton in the receiving game throughout their career, but Myles Gaskin is still here. He's kind of like James White-esque, where he makes his money on third down, where he's a good pass protector, secure hands, good route runner. I don't know if he'll make the team or not, but would probably be their next best option if Achane isn't healthy and Mostert goes down. We'll see if he's on the team, though. So again, 21st at quarterback, third in the league in weapons. But let's talk about those running backs a little bit more and rank them as running backs, where they are 23rd in the NFL. And it's another situation where if you could guarantee me a full season of Raheem Mostert health, they'd climb up a few spots. But that's just not been the brand on Raheem Mostert. And at a running back position where these guys are getting hurt all the time, I would be lying if I said I expect Raheem Mostert to play every game. I hope he does, because he's a really underrated and fun to watch running back when he is healthy. His speed is game-breaking, but he's traded a little bit of that speed, though not much, to put on some muscle and power to his game. And it's really led to a much more balanced running back style. So many of his runs in San Francisco were wide zones or gap runs where he had a clean lane and just could take off to the house. Here, he hasn't had quite as much room to work with. He's had to be a little bit more patient and show more vision and break more tackles, and he's accomplished all of those things. So you don't see a lot of 31-year-old running backs playing their best football at that age, but that's really been the case with Raheem Mostert. I think his film was better last year than it ever has been in terms of completeness as a back. But again, a guy that's 31 and a half years old that's had a career just riddled with injuries, how much do you get from Raheem Mostert? It's a legitimate question to ask. Jeff Wilson is the backup. He's a very balanced, fine runner. I don't really have a lot to say about Jeff Wilson. He's produced when he's played. He's virtually never caught my eye in terms of like wow plays, but he's efficient, good vision, fine, capable backup. The guy that we're all going to be kind of keeping our eyes on, though, if something happens to Raheem Mostert, is Devon Achane, the third-round pick out of Texas A&M. And, you know, I had some concerns about Achane. I liked Achane, but I was like, he's got to go somewhere that's the right fit to utilize his skill set, where they'll either get him running a lot of wide zone, or they'll get him where they can just get him in space. And Miami's a great fit for that. Of course, they run a lot of wide zone where they can tap into his speed just as they do with Raheem Mostert. But even if the run blocking isn't great here, their use of RPOs do keep the linebackers from flying downhill and plugging those gaps right away. And that does allow guys like Mostert and Achane to kind of build up that speed a little bit more. And once A-Chain can just get a step and get that speed going, he has enough really just overall momentum with his speed and the little play strength that he does have to run through arm tackles. So he's going to be a very interesting player if and when he gets on the field. It's only a matter of time. Like I used the 10th pick in my dynasty draft on Devon A-Chain because I think at least by next year he has superstar potential within this offense, because I just don't know how much Mostert has left in him. But even this year, I think, you know, the injury to A-Chain isn't even that big of a deal for me, because I think Mostert's going to be healthy to start the year, but by the time A-Chain's healthy by week 3 or 4, it was just a shoulder injury. It's not going to slow down his legs or anything. Is Mostert even available at that point? So it really does, to me, just come down to how healthy is Raheem Mostert in terms of when we see Devon A-Chain, but I expect him to be pretty good within this offense. He does, however, have to beat out Savon Ahmed, who has similar traits in terms of speed and all that. They definitely have a type, right? These wide zone style runners. Myles Gaskin, on the other hand, again, like I said, I think is more being stashed for potential depth in the receiving game. But overall, it's a good running back room. They rank 23rd. I think they got plenty of guys here to get the job done there. It's just nothing crazy in a league full of excellent running backs. They're going to get a slight bump in the QB run multiplier grade from Tua, and that's very scheme related, but it's how the RPOs open things up, how the play action opens things up. Not so much actually using Tua on designed runs. They might mix one or two in there, but you know they want Tua getting hit as little as possible, and that's a smart idea. But let's talk about my biggest concern for this offense, and that's the offensive line. Now, it is worth noting that Mike McDaniel's scheme schemes out of a lot of their offensive line questions. They have a ton of moving pockets, and the ball's getting out quickly, and a lot of the run game is jet sweeps and outside runs, and they almost try to reduce the impact that the offensive line has on their offense in a very unique way, and there's no easy way to explain that other than just watching them play. You can just tell that they're kind of, in a weird way, okay with having some weaknesses on the offensive line if that means they're allowed to go out and spend on the defense and bring in these crazy playmakers. But in terms of like drop back passing game, they've got some real serious potential weak links here that could decrease their ceiling a little bit. We did see some teams last year like Green Bay and San Francisco kind of force this offense to play left-handed a little bit. And as the year went on, teams kind of figured out some of their gimmicks. And it was in those situations where it was like, wow, the pass protection is not very good here. So they ranked 28th in pass blocking, a little bit better in run blocking, where I've got them 23rd. But let's go through it left to right. You got Teron Armstead at left tackle, which when he's healthy, you feel great about that. He's a superstar pass protector and just a very good run blocker. There's no questions about what he is when he's on the field. He's kind of consistently graded out as I just described him. But the injuries is where you have the questions. He's like to a T missed somewhere between like 2 and 6 games every year of his career. And that was no different last year. It played out exactly as we said it probably would. And I would say that'll happen again. And that's exactly why the Dolphins go and get Isaiah Wynn and try to fill out their tackle depth a little bit more. But in the 12 to 15 games that you have him, he's a stud. But then you've got Liam Eichenberg currently listed as the starter at left guard. And I don't know about that, man. I thought Robert Jones played pretty well as a young left guard, as someone that I even compared to Robert Hunt literally coming out in the draft. And as an undrafted pickup, I was like, yeah, Robert Jones might be similar to Robert Hunt someday. He stepped in last year and looked like a young Robert Hunt. So I'm a little bit surprised that they're going with the guy with the draft capital over the guy that's just a better player at this point in time. But if Eichenberg is a complete disaster, maybe they will make the right call there and go to Robert Jones. So it at least increases the long-term floor there. But in terms of rolling Liam Eichenberg out week 1, why do we believe things are going to be better? You know, in 2 years in the NFL, he's struggled wherever they've played him. He's got good technique. That's not the problem. He's got the right mentality. That's not the problem. It's just his play strength has not been able to play at the NFL level. So unless he's put on a bunch of strength in the weight room, I don't know that he can play at a consistent enough level to hold up at guard. And until he does, I'm not going to give him credit for being anything other than a liability at left guard. Now at center, you're in a good spot. Connor Williams came in as a free agent last year from Dallas, and I liked him moving all the way back, not back, but all the way into center. Started as a tackle in college, played guard for the Cowboys, now a center here. I love him in this system with all these moving pockets. His athleticism really translates there. The run game, he's excellent. Has really settled in as one of the 10 to 12-ish best centers in the NFL. He's better in the run game than he is as a pass blocker. You don't want to leave him one-on-one. He's got kind of stumpy arms, and just it's a little bit of that Garrett Bradbury thing where his size just doesn't always hold up against these big nose tackles, but had a bit of a breakout year last year, and he has finally been a hit for this team, which they've been looking for, along with Robert Hunt, who was for a while the only thing they had on this offensive line. But he's definitely settled in as a really solid, good all-around guard. Every year he seems to get a little bit smarter, a little bit cleaner with his technique, a little bit stronger, and heading into a contract year, he might have like a Pro Bowl caliber season. But really in both phases, I have no questions about Robert Hunt. It's a good combo there with Williams and Hunt. That helped this team do a lot of stuff in the run game last year, especially. But then, unfortunately, we have to have another very similar conversation with Austin Jackson that we did about Liam Eichenberg. Austin Jackson has shown us no signs that he can be a capable offensive lineman in the NFL. And while his athleticism can do him some favors at times with some nice blocks, it's been everything with him. Hand placement, footwork, play strength, understanding, opposing pass rushers' pass rush plan and how they want to attack him. It's been really a rough go at it for Austin Jackson. Supposedly, it's been a good preseason for him. I will definitely believe it when I see it. But a very clear potential weak link there at right tackle, which is a huge reason this team ranks 28th in pass blocking, straight up. Now, the depth is good and better than some of these starters, frankly. We already talked about how I think Robert Jones would elevate this group if he were to start at left guard. But I think at tackle, you have three options that are probably better players than Austin Jackson. Isaiah Wynn being one of those. Wynn's currently listed as a guard, which is interesting. Maybe they're so down on what he showed as a tackle that they do want him as guard depth. But the fact that he can't beat out Liam Eichenberg is very strange. And likewise with beating out Austin Jackson at right tackle. I liked this signing when they made it. 3 out of 4 years of Isaiah Wynn's career, he's been a pretty solid to good offensive tackle for the Patriots. But last year, he was a bit of a turnstile. So I don't know what the hell happened. I don't know if he had an injury that just took away his physical abilities, if he's lost all of his confidence or what. But we don't really know what Isaiah Wynn is anymore, and I'm not going to lie, it's concerning that he hasn't won at least one of these jobs unless they're just being stubborn with draft capital and really want these guys to work out with Eichenberg and Jackson, who they both spent pretty decent picks on. But I would still bet that Wynn would be better than Austin Jackson. We'll see how that all plays out. They also signed Cedric Ogbuehi, who's played 1 million games in the NFL, and he's settled in as a good backup tackle. Not going to be a consistent starter or anything like that, but still probably better than Austin Jackson. Kendall Lamb kind of likewise with Cedric Ogbuehi, very similar types of veteran backups there. So you're running 8 deep with everybody we've talked about so far. You got Dan Feeney, Lester Cotton. They've played a little bit, haven't looked great. They draft Ryan Hayes in the 7th round. Didn't mind his run blocking out of Michigan, but definitely hated his pass blocking. Thought he had a horrible anchor, and that showed right away at the Senior Bowl. So I wouldn't want to see him out there. The other interesting guy here, though, is Jaron Christian, who had kind of just a random falling out after looking like a potential starting tackle for the Houston Texans. He had a couple years there as a third-round pick with some length and size where his pass protecting looked pretty good. Now, he's not a great athlete and has really struggled to get off the ball in the run game, so maybe that's a turnoff for a lot of coaches, and why he just doesn't see a lot of playing time. But I, again, think he's a better pass protector than Austin Jackson, most likely. So we'll see if he even makes the team, but I would keep my eyes on him. It's a polarizing group, man. You got some good players, but one of them has a crazy injury concern in Teron Armstead. You got some horrible starters and then really good depth. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about this O-line overall. They rank as my 26th offensive line in the NFL. And ultimately, while they don't really hurt the schemed up passing game for those reasons we described earlier, you do feel this as a more of a bad group in terms of the drop back passing game and in the run game, where a lot of times their run blocking does get a little bit muddy, but it's much more of a question in pass blocking than it is in run blocking. They get a decent boost there, by the way, for the run blocking from their skill players. The tight ends are okay. Smith, Saubert, Croft. Alec Ingold's a pretty good run blocking fullback. Tyreek Hill's actually a pretty good run blocking wide receiver. You'd think with his archetype, he wouldn't be so much, but he's got good play strength and he's got good effort there, so that's something. But that does round out the offense as a whole, and they come out as my 11th overall offense. Shouldn't be a huge surprise, though, that they're much higher in the passing game than they are in the run game. I've got them 25th in the run game. They're just kind of on the ground. They were kind of on the ground last year. It's much more of a boom or bust run game. It's like they're either getting these big chunks or they're running into a brick wall. It kind of feels like a lot of the times. And I'd much rather have a group that can help you stay ahead of the chains more consistently. But in the passing game, obviously, they're going to be pretty well run. You have some questions about the drop back pass game. 3rd and 9, can they protect long enough for Tua with that offensive line? And can Tua stay healthy? But other than that, this offense should be roaring through the air just like they were last year, where they rank 8th in the passing game. But now let's flip over and talk about this defense that, as we mentioned earlier in the video, made some nice improvements this offseason. So let's start with the defensive line. A very good unit up front. They rank as the 7th overall defensive line for me, 11th in pass rush, and 3rd in run defense. And, that run defense, I just want to say off the bat, that's going to be a big deal for this team, that they can line up with 4 guys up front here and stop the run. We mentioned kind of how Fangio-style schemes tend to give up a lot of rushing yards because they're trusting those defensive lines to get stops with 6-man fronts. And that's a big ask. You're asking guys to split double teams and make plays at the line of scrimmage. And this group is about as good as that as anyone in the league. And while we're going down this path, let's just start by highlighting Christian Wilkins, because while he's not a true nose tackle, he plays at about 315 pounds, which is certainly good enough to hang against double teams and make plays there. He's not doing quite what Vita Vea and Grover Stewart and, of course, DJ Reader can do in terms of truly two-gapping. But I will give Wilkins credit in that I think he might have the best combination of pad level, technique, play strength at his size, where some of the, because he's not 330 pounds, he's got a little bit of extra quickness to use his feet to shed blocks and, get in a good position to actually finish tackles. His arm strength is ridiculous to shed and wrap guys up. He is genuinely an elite run defending defensive tackle, especially as a 3-tack or a 2, like where he's only responsible for 1 gap. As a 2-gapper, he can do it, just not quite as well. So, it is a bit of a scheme change here. We'll see kind of how often they ask him to 2-gap and if that hurts his kind of run defense grade in the same way that it does with guys like Vita Vea and Kenny Clark and something like that. But Overall, this dude deserves all the credit in the world for being a truly special run defender that is going to open this team up schematically in a lot of underrated ways. I'm not really all that blown away by his pass rushing ability. It's fine. He's persistent. He's got the strength and quickness to kind of navigate his way to the quarterback. I feel like you don't see a ton of early wins from Christian Wilkins where he's got crazy power or get off or these incredible pass rush moves. He's fine. He ended up with like 30 pressures, a handful of sacks. If there's a knock on Wilkins, it's that he's not one of the 15 or so best pass rushing defensive tackles, but I think he makes up for it with what he does as a run defender. But we might as well talk about his running mate on the inside before we talk about this edge duo. Zach Sieler is one of the more underrated players in the entire NFL. I will say, though, that the scheme change will be something to monitor for him. He played as kind of that 4-eye a lot of the times, a gap shooter where he can just play loose in kind of a Belichick-style front. Similar-ish to how guys like Trey Flowers in his prime and Dietrich Wise have been opened up. Here he's going to be asked to be a very standard defensive tackle. I think he can handle it, though, and it's not like Miami never asked him to do that, right? So it will be something to monitor in terms of consistency over the course of the season if he can continue to play at this level, but I think he can. Baltimore let him go in 2019, and it's pretty rare Baltimore makes a mistake like this because he's been a badass for Miami, and he was one of the first kind of under-the-radar guys that showed up and played for that early Brian Flores club that was so bad. But now it's to the point where he's one of the more recognizable players on this defense, at least for Dolphins fans. I don't know if around the league he gets as much respect as he deserves, but maybe that's coming. I don't know. Maybe it never will, but his effort against the run is about as good as it gets. He's got really quick feet to not just shoot gaps, but use that to shed in the run game. He's got a decent enough anchor. And straight up, he'd be the best run defending 3 technique for a lot of teams in the NFL. And he is their number 2 guy here. So that's obviously a huge asset. Likewise, as a pass rusher, he's just solid, nothing special. He's a little bit different than Wilkins, where I think Sieler is a little bit more aggressive as a rusher. When he wins, he seems to win a little bit quicker and early, whereas Christian Wilkins a little bit more of that slow burn. So it's not a bad complementary skill set of pass rushers on the inside. It's just kind of an average interior duo in terms of pass rush and one of the best in terms of run defense. But then you go to the outside, and it's a very good duo here with really Jalen Phillips. A lot of people are going to think Bradley Chubb is the number 1 guy. He's not. Jalen Phillips is a way better player than Bradley Chubb. It's not even close. And Dolphins fans know that, even if you are higher on Bradley Chubb. Phillips broke out last year. There's no way around it. First round pick, interesting background where he had to step away from football after being one of the top recruits in the country, went from UCLA to Miami and balled out at Miami, earned himself being the first edge player drafted in that draft, and has answered to this point in time that, you know, his concussion history and the scary injuries that made him step away from the game are in the rear view mirror, and now he can just focus on development and balling out, where he really, in the second half of last year, was an elite pass rusher, really, for, like I said, the second half of the year. The first half, he was still good, but something really clicked. And if that's the guy Miami gets moving forward, for a guy that has all the tools to, there's no reason to believe they can't get that. He really can be that Khalil Mack, Nick Bosa, like Von Miller level pass. Like, he has those tools. He's got the speed, the power, the pass rush moves. He brings out everything. He's got spins and rips and everything. They can line him up on the inside where he was nasty working on guards and stuff. Like, the sky is really the limit for Jalen Phillips. And it's just a matter of really him being the guy he was in the second half of the year, as opposed to the guy he was as a rookie where he was just okay, and in the first half of the year where he was just okay. So prove that it's not just a flash in the pan, and I don't think it is. He's also a good run defender, a really good run defender, because he's got all the physical traits and play strength and intensity to do it. And then you got Bradley Chubb, who is the number 2 here. I mentioned in the intro, I think this was an egregious overpay in terms of draft capital and, more importantly, salary cap. They gave him immediately a top-of-the-market edge rush contract, and he's just not that good of a player. I mean, he is essentially that kind of level of like Preston Smith. I think I've brought him up a bunch of times because Preston Smith feels like the prototype number 2 edge, where he's like not a game wrecker, but he's pretty solid in both phases, and that's Bradley Chubb. He's got good size, good length, solid athleticism, I would say, for a starting edge rusher in the NFL, and good play strength, and that pairs with a overall good, powerful game. He can win with a bull rush. He can rip his way to the quarterback. He doesn't have a lot of speed or bend to threaten the corner, and as a run defender, those traits show up and help his game there. So I really am not trying to dog on Bradley Chubb, but I would have loved to seen the reaction in the Broncos front office when they fetched a first-round pick for a player that they were probably pretty happy to just let walk and get a third-round comp pick, let alone a first that they could then go and flip for Sean Payton. So as a compliment to what you hope Jalen Phillips is going to be, that's totally fine. And at some point, you can get rid of Chubb and just give that money to Jalen Phillips, who's on a rookie contract. So they're able to kind of swallow that. But I also don't think this is like the game-wrecking duo that I think a lot of people might say it is. It's a really good duo, but it's not that. So those are your 4 starters, but there's like 3 other guys that I think we'll see a pretty good amount of playing time from here. The first of which is Andrew Van Ginkel on the edge. Now, he was much more of that kind of hybrid outside backer in a Belichick defense. But that said, that role still exists in a Fangio scheme. You know, Malik Reed is really a poor man's Andrew Van Ginkel, who's been with Vic Fangio, going back to the Denver days. But Van Ginkel actually rotated a lot with Bradley Chubb on early downs last year, even after they brought in Chubb. Because Van Ginkel's even a better run defender than Bradley Chubb, and that's saying something. You know, Chubb's a good run defender, but Van Ginkel is a maniac against the run, so they don't want to just waste that on the bench. They'll use him. He's really good dropping into coverage. He can even operate as off-ball depth in a pinch if they need it. So he's a really useful player that is still gonna play here. And then Malik Reed, like we said, is just kind of a poor man's version of that. Now, he's more true edge. I don't think you'd put Malik Reed as an off-ball, but Reed's just really quick with his feet. He's physical. He just doesn't have explosive traits, which have held him back as a pass rusher. But he had a decent year for Pittsburgh. He was a good player for Denver. It was a good signing to bring him in, and he's going to be really good early down rotational depth. That's really all they need. Cameron Good was a 7th-round pick years ago, hasn't played yet, probably sticks around as really deep depth, but it's really just a 4-man group, and that's plenty. But there's 2 other guys that are going to be kind of more quote-unquote rotational starters, if you will. Number 1 is Raekwon Davis, and he's the one that's going to be the nose tackle when they have to get into a base 3-4 front. And I like that because Wilkins and Sealer, as we mentioned, don't have the size to really 2-gap, but I'd rather you have a better option than Raekwon Davis. He's someone that played a lot of edge at Alabama, and I don't think he's fully discovered the pad level element of the position. He's a little bit unbalanced and ends up on the ground a lot. I don't love the way the old regime used Raekwon Davis. I much more wanted to see him in more of that Calais Campbell path, where instead of gaining weight, he can play around 300 and, you know, be a lengthy edge disruptor like a Tano Passignon. But they've gone the other way with his career. I think that was a mistake. And, you know, he'll eat up space and probably won't hold his team back. But I do wish they had a better true nose tackle than that, because the rest of these guys aren't that either. The last guy here is Emmanuel Ogbah. Really another one of these guys that we don't necessarily know what we're going to get, similar to like what we said about Isaiah Wynn, where last year was a crazy bad year. He was horrible when he played. So I think you got to go back even a year before that. So 2021, Ogbah had a breakout year. He was an impactful pass rusher, got a really nice contract here, I think like 15 or 16 mil a year. Like it was good hybrid end pass rushing money. But last year happens, and the year starts, and he was useless, nowhere to be found, and then he gets hurt. So was that an injury that was just getting ready to be, season ending, that was leading to his bad production? Did he get his money and run away with it? I don't have a great answer, but you factor that in with the fact that this is a completely different scheme. Ogba was successful as that sort of Dietrich Wise role where he's playing a lot of 4-eye, more 5 technique on early downs, that kind of Belichick end, kind of in that Keon White mold, what Belichick's looking for there. That's not going to be as easy to get him in those positions to succeed here with Vic Fangio's scheme. He's obviously not a Fangio guy. And while he's shown good tape in the past, I'm actually not very optimistic that he's going to do much for this team. But you have to acknowledge he does have the skill set to get after the quarterback if used correctly. And maybe Fangio finds a way to do that. But they don't need him. They've got plenty. And if they want to get into like 5-man rush packages, they can do that with Ogba. But we'll see what we get from him. I think it's a very much unknown variable there. You got some low-level depth kind of competing for roster spots. Josiah Bronson, Brandon Peely, Deshaun Hand, who had a breakout rookie season for Detroit like 3 centuries ago, it feels like, and he's done nothing since. It's quietly a pretty thin interior group, especially, depending on what Ogba gives you. But Sealer and Wilkins played a ridiculous amount of snaps last year. They have the stamina to really be full-time starters there, so it's less of a concern. But good defensive line overall. They rank 7th overall, 3rd in D-line run defense, and 11th in terms of pass rush. Let's talk about the linebackers. Very middle of the road group there. They rank 15th in overall linebacker grade, 14th in coverage, 19th in run defense. And these two players are a little bit different stylistically, though. Size-wise, they're both what you would consider undersized. Baker, I think, is 6'2", 225, 230. David Long is like 5'11", 230. But Baker's more coverage-minded and Long's more aggressive run defense-minded, which it's not a horrible complementary duo to have there, I suppose, though each have their own weaknesses, or at least non-strengths. But Baker's kind of your classic undersized linebacker. He can man up running backs out of the backfield. He can hang with tight ends. He's got pretty good zone instincts, though nothing terribly special. Good speed, good range. Even against the run, he's got solid discipline, solid tackler, all that stuff, but his size is a natural detractor from his ability to make himself felt in the trenches. And then David Long is not necessarily your typical undersized linebacker. Long, I think, thinks he's like Ray Lewis playing in 2005. He is aggressive, he's a headhunter, he's never seen a play fake that he didn't like. Sometimes it even leads to a lack of gap discipline, which is why he's not necessarily an elite run defender. Sometimes it leads to bad angles where he actually misses a few too many tackles for your liking. 15% missed tackle percentage last year. His aggressiveness also, I think, puts him in some compromising situations in terms of his ability to stay healthy, which has shown throughout his career. So he's an imperfect player, but his play style leads to some really exciting plays as a linebacker. And that's why Titans fans get so excited about him, because once or twice a game, he's going to make a play that most linebackers just won't. He sees things very quickly. And, at least in Mike Vrabel's defense, he was allowed to play extremely free and loose. And, we'll see how that translates to a Fangio style scheme where you prefer much more discipline and almost a conservative approach at times from these linebackers. It'll be interesting to see how that all kind of ultimately plays out. But needless to say, he is not afraid to defend the run and is going to be a physical presence in the trenches that helps out the linebacker run defense. In coverage, he just, like I said, he's just super aggressive. He is going to attach to the first guy he sees. He's pretty easy to manipulate with your eyes. Play action, he's really not very good. But he can get in the way of passing lanes and make plays back there because of that aggressive nature. So he's a fun linebacker. He plays linebacker like we all do in Madden, but it doesn't always translate to consistent good play on the NFL field that way. In terms of depth, Duke Riley is a journeyman veteran at this point. He's done a good job to put on weight and carved out a decent career as a backup linebacker and a special teamer. Channing Tindall is interesting. I don't know when the opportunity or if the opportunity is going to come for him, but was a super athlete at Georgia that was kind of fighting for reps behind Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean. Not the most well-rounded skill set yet, but definitely a fascinating prospect that with the right coaching could turn into a starter someday. And it'll probably just be those four that make the team. I don't know about Mike Rose or Aubrey Miller, but uniquely crafted linebacker room between Baker and Long. Going to be fun to kind of watch these two guys stylistically play off each other, and should be a pretty fun, solid group there. Let's talk about the secondary, which is a really difficult group to rank. You've got some pretty major wild cards with this secondary, and that's what leads them to be more towards the middle of the league, where I rank them 14th. But their upside is remarkable, and before the Jalen Ramsey injury, they were definitely top 10, but you're going to miss Jalen Ramsey for 2/3 of the season. You have to factor that in. It's difficult to know how much in an exercise like this, because you are hoping that Jalen Ramsey in December and into the playoffs, as long as this team can get to the playoffs, is going to be out there and be an impact. And it's not like he needs a lot of time to get reps in this defense. He's played in a Fangio-style defense for the last few years for the Rams. It's more about just getting back 100% healthy. Was pretty damn wild that it only took a third-round pick to get a top 3 to 5 corner in the NFL, who's only 28 years old, by the way. Like, I think he's got a couple years left in his prime here. And yes, I do still think he's in his prime. I think he's had some unfortunate losses against superstar wide receivers, guys like Jamar Chase, Stephon Diggs. I think it was week 1 last year. Like, yeah, those guys are going to get anybody's number from time to time. But when you're in prime time and you're a corner and on Twitter people are passing around clips, people are going to act like you're cooked. And yeah, those losses will hurt your PFF grade by the end of the season. But from a play-to-play perspective, I still see a superior athlete at the position with rare size, rare strength. He's a ridiculous run defender, by the way. Like, the Rams would stick him in the slot as a quasi-strong safety at times because he's so physical coming down in the box, such a good tackler. He's a high IQ zone defender. He's a super capable man defender. You can literally do whatever the hell you want with Jalen Ramsey. He's a true alpha, number 1 corner. And it just sucks that he got hurt because, like I said, this secondary was going to really be well crafted around him. But now they're going to need all these other guys to step up in a huge way. And I think that brings in some questions, like, for those first 12 games or whatever it is, if this secondary can hang. We mentioned, like, there's wild cards for this secondary, and it's not just the Jalen Ramsey injury. You know, Xavier Howard looked washed last year for a large chunk of the season. Gave up the second most yards of any corner in the NFL. The interception numbers, where he's known for being a guy that consistently gets you a handful of interceptions every year, down to 1. So just not in the same position to make those plays. And it wasn't for a lack of targets either. Was targeted just about as many times as the last couple years before that. He's 30 years old. Age comes for everybody, especially at this cornerback position. And he's not a guy like Jalen Ramsey that was a super athlete. Like, he's just not the fastest, most physically gifted corner in the world. So while there were still some good coverage reps on film, and I don't think he's going to be maybe quite as bad as he was last year, I certainly don't think he's the borderline number 1 star corner that he's been in years past. And he's difficult to know exactly what you're going to get from him. You know, I do think the arrow is in general pointing down, but I think it's possible he plays a little better than he did last year too. So we'll see what they get from Xavier Howard. him making the Pro Bowl last year, there's a couple players every year that were like, how the hell did that guy make the Pro Bowl? And Xavier Howard was closer to the 50th best corner in the NFL last year than he was a top 8. But then you have the breakout rookie, Kader Coho, who the arrow is definitely pointing up on him. They nailed this undrafted pickup last year out of Texas A&M Commerce. Definitely wasn't on my radar, but he comes in and by week 3, he's starting in the slot. And he was really solid across the board all season. There was definitely some games where teams tested him. The Chargers went after him, 15 targets, gave up 83 yards, some wins, some losses. Wasn't just that game. All year long, teams were really testing Kader Coho, and he held up pretty well, all things considered. It's not that he was locked down or anything, but I think the arrow can still be pointing up on him, and he's not a question mark. It's the only question is he a dominant corner? Probably not, but I think he's a solid starter for them, and certainly not where my questions lie in this secondary. But we do have to get back to more question marks with Cam Smith and Noah Igbenogany and Eli Apple and whoever is going to win this starting corner job for as long as Jalen Ramsey is injured. I would put my money on Cam Smith, the second-round pick. And Cam Smith was a hyped-up prospect, was early in the process viewed as a locked-in first-rounder. Right away when I got to his film, I wasn't sold as a first-round corner. But second round, I was totally fine with it. I just think he's a very loose man-to-man coverage player. I don't love his ability kind of on the trail to react to route breaks and stay sticky in man coverage. But he has the physical tools to get better in that phase. But what I did like about him was how quick his acceleration was. When he saw a screen or was in zone reading the quarterback's eyes and he saw it and took off, his first few steps were insane. So that in a Fangio style defense where they're going to play a lot of off and read the quarterback's eyes and put him in a position where hopefully that trait can thrive, you might see a lot of plays. I thought there were some similarities between Cam Smith and Emmanuel Forbes in their play styles. And I think the Dolphins got a similar-minded corner there in Cam Smith. So I think in this fit, he can definitely have a good rookie season. I think he will get beat. He's not a shutdown corner by any stretch of the imagination. And they're going to have to live with him giving up some yards, hopefully at the expense of some extra playmaking there. And then hopefully in time he can grow as a more consistent cover player in a way that Noah Igbenogany has not. He's the next guy we'll talk about here. I have heard some camp hype for the former first-round pick. Noah Igbenogany was super talented, super young. I think he's still only like 24 years old, still on that rookie contract. It's not to say he can't or couldn't have figured things out here, but it's very much a believe it when I see it type of situation. Has not played well when he's been on the field. They do still have Nick Needham, who is a good slot corner for what he is, has played a lot of snaps for this Dolphins team, has started a lot of games, and he's okay depth, but very middle of the road there. And then they bring in Eli Apple, who's a very boom or bust cover corner. Aggressive, grabby, risk taker. Has some ugly games, has some good games, probably overhated. I don't mind picking him up as depth after the Jalen Ramsey injury, but he would provide a lot of weekly inconsistency for the secondary there. Then you got a couple more special teams types that have flashed some play at corner, Keon Crossan and Justin Bethel. It is, for what it's worth, one of the deeper groups of corners in the league, and that'll help them survive until Jalen Ramsey gets back. But if Xavier Howard is what he was last year, and that's certainly possible, this is going to be one of the worst cornerback rooms in the league until Jalen Ramsey gets back, because you're just not going to have any good starters. It's just a bunch of solid to replacement level guys. But that's, kind of a pessimistic outlook. There's a world where Howard, in more of a zone-heavy system as opposed to the man-heavy defense they played last year, can be less of a liability, and that Cam Smith can be a pretty good rookie in the second round. So I don't want to be all pessimism, but that's going to be tough for those two things to go right for them and for this secondary to be any good until Ramsey gets back. I shouldn't say any good, but be too good until Jalen Ramsey gets back. And then the safety room, honestly, I have a massive question mark here. Not about Javon Holland. I'll talk about him later, but Brandon Jones is supposed to start here. And I never really fully agreed with Brandon Jones being a starter in Miami. I just don't see the coverage feel there, the coverage consistency. I don't see high-end athletic traits. Hell, for what they ask him to do, I don't even see this great run defender. And that's why he played in that Brian Flores-style defense in sort of that Patrick Chung role, where he's a strong safety, he's responsible for tight ends, slot receivers, and the run game. Well, this is going to be a very different defense. This is going to be a split safety defense. You want guys with range that can flip their hips and run and have range over the top, maybe rotate into cover 3. You aren't rotating into cover 3 with Brandon Jones. You're just not going to do it. So it keys off a little bit what your coverages are going to be to the quarterback. But more importantly, he's going to be put in much more compromising situations in terms of coverage in this defense. And currently listed as the starter, I'm like, why? I think there's 2 other guys on the depth chart who are better safeties for this defense than Brandon Jones. In Deshaun Elliott, who they sign, who's the definition of an average replacement level starter. Not a great athlete, but good head on his shoulders, good run defender, solid enough coverage instincts. I definitely think he'd be better than Brandon Jones. And I think even Verone McKinley, who's going to be super comfortable in this defense, played a lot of quarters and split safety stuff at Oregon, a brilliant guy who just lacks physical tools. But I still think he's about as fast as Brandon Jones, so why not go with him? I get the run defense aspect of things, but I'm worried that Brandon Jones is going to be wasted space on passing downs for this defense and is among players that are question marks for me in terms of do they fit schematically the new defense. He's number 1. And we'll see how long they go with him and if anything clicks for him within this scheme. So it's not just the cornerback questions that keep this secondary outside the top 10. Jalen Ramsey's injury may have dragged them out of it, but it's not to say that they didn't have any questions before the Ramsey injury. Now, Javon Holland, as the other safety, is going to be freaking awesome. I think he might be due for a breakout season. How many times, for those that have followed this channel, have I talked about guys with slot corner experience going to a Fangio-style scheme and everything clicking into place? And that's Javon Holland, who played slot corner at Oregon, has been able to play free safety in the NFL at a very high level. I think he's quite easily top 10 at the position in the league. But you put him in a spot where he gets to play hybrid quarters heavy, play in a hybrid quarters heavy defense. A lot of that man coverage ability that he's so good at, his fluid hips, his route anticipation, his understanding of route combinations. He's Micah Hyde in this defense. He really is. So I expect big things from Javon Holland. Was my number 1 safety in that draft class. He's had a great career so far, but he could be due for even bigger things ahead. So he's not my question. It's Brandon Jones. In terms of remaining safety depth, Elijah Campbell, don't know much about him. He's played a little bit, hasn't shown much. But Trill Williams is also fascinating. Another guy with corner experience that missed, I want to say he missed his undrafted rookie season due to an injury. Was a hyped up draft prospect by many. I wasn't quite as high on him, but I definitely saw some of the football IQ and some of that stuff. Similar things we've said about Verone McKinney, Javon Holland. That IQ and playmaking could be something in this system, but I don't want to spend too much time on a guy that might not make the team. Keep an eye on him, though, if he does. So, again, 14th for overall DB coverage in the secondary, a very high variance group with a lot of different factors. And then for the DB run support, it's a very good group. Really no questions other than Cam Smith, if he's in the starting lineup. Wasn't great against the run in college, was more boomer bust in that department. But without a full season of Jalen Ramsey, they really don't have any heavy difference makers in terms of run defense. Call it tier 4 without Jalen Ramsey and tier 2 with Jalen Ramsey, meeting in the middle there at tier 3, which ranks 11th to 20th in terms of how much these guys are going to contribute against the run. But let's wrap up this defense. An improved group, as I mentioned. I have them ranked as the 7th best defense in the NFL, and potentially even more notably is they're balanced. They are 8th in pass defense and 4th in run defense. It's a pretty foolproof group, and what's exciting is, we're ranking this for the season as a whole, but you put Jalen Ramsey in there, and maybe by season's end, they've figured out that Brandon Jones shouldn't be starting at safety. And this could be really one of the best pass defenses and run defenses in the league, paired with what we already saw was a very high-ranking offense. There's risk involved here for sure with Tua's health and the offensive line and Jalen Ramsey's injury on the back end. But if things go according to plan for the Dolphins, they're in my tier of teams that could win a Super Bowl here for a reason. They absolutely could accomplish that grand task. Even though it's going to have to come through this crazy deep AFC, there's still 2 teams in this division that we haven't revealed yet. There's only 7 teams left to go for the whole league. But let's recap their strengths and weaknesses, take a look at their schedule, then we'll be on our way. Main strengths, offense, go Burr. That speed, that entire scheme with the offense is the biggest strength when you think about the Miami Dolphins. Was uncoverable for the majority of last season. I don't expect that to just change. Then you look at the defense, the front 6. We got to kind of reshape our minds a little bit to say front 6 now in this modern defensive era instead of front 7, but it is one of the best front 6s and most complete front 6s in terms of balance of pass rush and run defense with all 6 players in the entire league. I'm going to really raise the floor, especially of this defense. And then I just think coaching on both sides of the ball is towards the top of the league, especially from a X's and O's schematic standpoint. Doesn't get a whole lot better than McDaniel and Fangio. Weaknesses, it's more questions than true weaknesses, right? Quarterback health questions. Until we see an injury, it's not a weakness, quarterback. Same thing with secondary. It's like, well, you got some questions on the back end. How much is Xavier Howard regressing? When do you get Jalen Ramsey back? What does Cam Smith look like as a rookie? What do they do with that safety room? There are things that they're going to have to solve as the year goes on. And I think it'll potentially be a strength by season's end, but with this schedule, with the importance of winning regular season games, how much does that ultimately hold them back? We'll find out. The only group that I think is probably going to finish as a weakness is that offensive line. They scheme around it, especially in the passing game. But again, you get into true drop back situations. Can that offensive line hold up? I think it's a legitimate question. But let's take a look at the schedule here. So Vegas has their over-under at 9.5. That's pretty standard for a lot of these AFC teams because these schedules are just so damn tough. This team, of course, has to get through the gauntlet of the AFC East. And they play the NFC East, which is the better of the NFC divisions. So that's obviously a complete gauntlet. They're going to have to play well in their non-division games. At the Chargers, week 1, out the gate, tough test. At New England, the week after that. Denver coming to town with Russell Wilson. The start to their season, it sounds overreactive, but those first 3 games are going to be so important to this team's season if things are going to go well, because you probably expect them at best to split against their own division and against that NFC East. That's really tough. Maybe they go 3-1 against the NFC East, but there's no way around it, man. This is not an easy schedule. I think 9.5 wins is on the mark in terms of how many games they end up winning. My formula spits them out at 9.2. I wouldn't bet the under. I think this is a really talented football team, and if they stay healthy, they should be able to get over 9.5, but there's risk involved there too, as we've described. I think there's Super Bowl odds, division odds. I think it's all fair game. If you believe in the Dolphins, I wouldn't necessarily shy you away from these odds. It's just, I don't see a ton of value from a gambling perspective on their season-long futures. But now it's time to just kind of close our eyes, cross our fingers that Tua can stay healthy and carry on with a great career. And this is going to be a really fun team to watch if that happens. I mean, this is like a dream of an offense with this speed, and this defense could come together and be a really fun group. Definitely looking forward to it. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown on the Dolphins here. Please do hit that like button if you haven't yet. Drop your comments down below where you think I went right, where you think I went wrong. Drop your comments. Who do you think is next with the number 7 spot in the series? And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that when it comes out. But until then, thank you for watching, and we'll see you later. Peace out.